Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Parkinson's Foundation's PD Health at Home Wellness Wednesdays. We're so glad you're here. Today's webinar is a special Valentine's Day themed program dedicated to fostering a deeper sense of connection with our loved ones. Living with Parkinson's can bring physical, emotional, and cognitive challenges that may affect our relationships, making it harder to feel close and connected. But love, understanding, and meaningful connection are always possible. In this session, we'll explore ways to strengthen emotional bonds despite these challenges through compassionate communication strategies, shared activities, and tools for deeper understanding. You'll gain practical ways to nurture and celebrate your unique connection with your loved one. Before we get into it, I want to remind you about our PD Health at Home virtual programs. Each week, we offer sessions tailored to support people with Parkinson's and their care partners, including Mindfulness Mondays, Wellness Wednesdays, Fitness Fridays, expert briefings, and our Spanish language series, Y Salud en Casa. Be sure to visit our website to see what's coming up next and explore our archived videos on YouTube. Our next Wellness Wednesday, we will focus on impulse control disorders and Parkinson's. Again, find out more and register for our programs at parkinson.org/pdhealth. PD Health at Home is presented by the Light of Day Foundation, whose generosity has made this program possible. Thank you, Light of Day. And to begin our formal presentation, I would like to introduce our presenter for today's webinar. Dr. Bradley McDaniels is an assistant professor at the University of North Texas, where he coordinates the Rehabilitation Studies undergraduate program. His research centers on well-being and quality of life issues, focusing on meaning, purpose, positive psychology, apathy, and psychosocial adaptation among individuals with chronic illnesses and disabilities, particularly Parkinson's disease. Dr. McDaniels is dedicated to enhancing understanding and support for the psychosocial needs of those affected by chronic health conditions. Brad, thank you for sharing your time and, of course, your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Krista. I'm excited to be here. This is always a highlight of my day, getting to interact with this community. So thanks for having me. Let me get to my slides here. Krista, just give me a voice that we're good here.
That's great. Yep.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks for having me, guys. Krista did a wonderful job of introducing me. Don't have too high expectations of what this might look like today, but we'll have some fun talking about some things I think that really matter. And, so one of the things that we're going to spend some time with today is looking at challenges that Parkinson's disease can create in relationships, right? And talking about what those things are, looking at how we can improve communication strategies. How do I overcome some of these challenges that I deal with? What are some things that I can do? What are some activities that I can engage in that may help with this connection? And hopefully you'll walk away with some practical tools, some things that you will be able to say, you know what, I can apply that in my life and hopefully in my relationships and make things a little bit better. So with that, let's just dive in. So what is it about Parkinson's disease that creates relationship problems? I frequently, when I do these talks, I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know these things, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Parkinson's affects physical and mental, emotional, spiritual, all of the well-being aspects of our lives. And it changes a lot of things, right? We have these motor symptoms, tremors, speech changes, gait abnormalities, masked faces, right? Things that can affect the way that we interact with other people. And they're really not talked about that much, right? We spend so much time talking about tremor and the motor features, but there are some of these other things that truly affect quality of life. We have cognitive and emotional shifts, depression, anxiety, demoralization, apathy. One thing that fits into that can affect relationships is stigma, right? How do I feel like you feel about me? So that's another area that I think is important to acknowledge and think about. And then thinking about ways that how can I adapt me, my life, my relationship, my interaction with other people, dealing with these new changes in my life, right? Because they're brand new. That day of diagnosis with Parkinson's disease, excuse me, things change pretty quickly in our lives, right? And so it's learning how do I adapt to some of this new stuff. So throughout that, some of the things, one of the challenges that we face is emotional connections can erode as we're dealing with stressors in our lives, some of these new things as a result of Parkinson's disease. And it's important that we talk about how do we foster this emotional closeness? How do we deal with it? And really, what we're talking about is building strong emotional bonds with our partners, with our care partners, right? Getting to a place where we feel safe, we have trust, and there's just this deep connection with one another. It also helps us deal with the uncertainty of Parkinson's disease, right? That's the one thing that we can guarantee with Parkinson's disease is uncertainty, right? The trajectory is never the same for two people. And the other thing we know is that it's always going to progress, right? And so this uncertainty can create internal strife as we deal with it and can cause us potentially to withhold from other people. And as we begin to withhold and lose this connection, it can result in loneliness, anxiety, depression, and increased conflict, right? When I don't feel like there's a connection with someone else, that's when loneliness creeps in, right? Loneliness is really a qualitative state of connection. It's not like social isolation. Social isolation is when you're alone, right? There's no one with you. But you can be with people and still feel lonely when there's not an emotional connection. So it's important to understand a little bit of that distinction. So thinking about how I'm going to best connect with another person, one of the first things that it starts with is me understanding me, right? This this being able to express my needs, but before I can express my needs, I need to know what my needs are, right? So part of that is feeling, excuse me, um, feeling like I understand who I am, what my struggles are, what my thought process is, what my needs are. And once I identify them, learning to be comfortable talking about them because it's an essential component, right? We can't have an intimate relationship with one another if I don't share with you what's really going on inside of me. Otherwise, it becomes really superficial. And one of the challenges I think that we see in relationships with people who have Parkinson's disease is this fear, this concern about being a burden on the other person, right? So maybe on your care partner, you're afraid that because you have some unique needs, that when you need help with something, that you're burdening them. And you know, that's not necessarily the case. I believe that one of the things that we do when we're able to express what our needs are and we're able to be vulnerable, it allows the other person to feel valued, to feel like you trust them, to feel like you're inviting them in to this relationship dynamic. And it shows that you trust them, right? And so it's really important, I believe, that as we navigate our relationship, that we get to a place where we're comfortable talking about what our needs are and spending some time trying to figure out what those needs might be. Which leads us into the next question. How do I do that? Right? How do I know what the things are that I need? What do I struggle with? And it's taking some time to self-reflect, right? Thinking about the things in my life that I struggle with. What are the things that I need? What are the areas, the emotional areas that I need support with? And excuse me, um, learning what those things are so that I can talk about them. The other thing that's important is, one of the things that I think in all of us in relationships struggle with is when there's conflict in a relationship, it's real easy to point the finger at the other person. You did this, you made me feel, rather than owning my own feelings, right? I give someone else the right to affect me emotionally, or I don't, right? So if I'm allowing you to affect me emotionally, that's my choice. And I have to own those emotions. And so part of that is talking about I. I I feel frustrated when, I feel hurt when, I feel lonely when, right? So I'm putting it on me rather than a blame. That really helps with the emotional connection that we have with each other. And it also leads us into the third point on this slide of trusted conversations, talking about why is it that I feel this way? What is it in me that's going on? And maybe as I begin to understand these feelings that I'm having, I spend a little more time in self-reflection and finding out what it is maybe that's missing in me. Maybe I'm relying too heavily on someone else to fulfill my emotional needs, right? So again, digging a little bit more into this self-awareness, self-intimacy, one of the practices that is very effective for learning about feelings, being grounded, understanding our emotions is mindfulness. It's staying present where I'm at right now and being, right? Just being right here, me with my emotions and thinking about what those are. What am I struggling with? What am I dealing with? How am I handling these issues? And then as we spend time in mindfulness, maybe begin jotting some of those things down in a journal, right? Writing down the things that you're struggling with. What are the thoughts and the feelings that I'm having that I'm not really sure what to do, how to deal with them or what to do with them? One of the great things about journaling is being able to look back over time and see how maybe thoughts and emotions and feelings have changed, how you've grown. It improves self-efficacy, right? It tells me that I am growing. I am learning how to deal with life on life's terms. And then it helps us with personal growth, right? Looking at maybe it's a simple mind shift of being able to say, I'm not focused on my problems. I'm looking at these things in my life as opportunities, right? And oftentimes when I talk with people about that stuff, it comes across that I'm encouraging someone to be Pollyanna, right? And saying everything's great, it's going to all work out. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's just a simple shift of saying, rather than focusing on the negative, how can I use what's happening in my life, these struggles that I'm dealing with, to help me grow and become a better version of myself, right? And it's just a process. It takes time to learn how to do this. And so as we begin to learn about who we are, what makes us tick, our feelings, our emotions, one of the things that is important to learn how to do is to express these things to your partner. And over the years, over my life and time counseling and interacting with people, one of the things that I know for certain is unspoken expectation leads to resentment, right? What happens, I can tell you it happens in my marriage all the time. I'll have an expectation of my wife that I've never shared with her, and then she doesn't fulfill that expectation, and I get mad about it, right? And when I say it, it makes total sense. You guys are like, that doesn't make sense, Brad. Why would you do that? But we do that, right? We have these feelings, things that we want. We need to be comfortable talking about them. Otherwise, we don't have the right to hold somebody else accountable for that thing, right? So when we don't share our expectations with people, we end up having unmet emotional needs, right? And we get frustrated. And that happens frequently with Parkinson's disease, right? Role changes in our lives. Maybe someone was taking care of the house. Maybe the other person was the primary breadwinner. Maybe those things shift. And now all of a sudden, I'm frustrated because I had an expectation that you were supposed to do this and we never talked about it. Now all of a sudden, I can get resentful. It can lead to social isolation and loneliness, right? Feeling like my whole world has shrunk down and it's all about me and this Parkinson's relationship that I'm dealing with. So we've got to begin thinking about strategies to address some of these assumptions. And the simplest strategy to begin with is sharing about these assumptions that we have, right? Going with open and direct conversations. What is it if I'm frustrated with my partner about something? Let's have a conversation about it. Again, talking with I statements, I am frustrated by XYZ, right? And let's have a conversation about it. Maybe sometimes it's about me owning my part in the frustration, right? It's always easier for me to blame someone else rather than owning what's mine. You know, I've always learned in any relationship conflict that we have, there's each person plays a part. And it might be that you only play 1% of the part. 99% of the issue is theirs. I need to own my 1%. And that opens the door for effective communication. And it also allows us to begin to be transparent with our feelings. Talk about the things that we want. What are the desires that we have in a relationship, in life, in our home, and communicating those effectively? Sometimes that takes practice, right? Learning to state what our needs are, what our desires are, and talking about some of these unspoken expectations. So, as we think about this, what we're leading into is how to have effective intimacy in a relationship, right? I know that most people, when they hear the word intimacy, immediately go to sex, right? Intimacy is a whole lot deeper than just sex, right? One of the ways that when Krista and I were talking about this presentation, we talked about was this idea of into me you see. I heard that said years ago as that's what intimacy is. I'm allowing me to be seen by you, the real me, right? Not a facade, not a mask, who is on the inside. And there are a variety of ways that we can have intimacy. You know, there's spiritual intimacy where we talk about connecting through mindfulness or through some kind of a shared belief. There is mental intimacy or um, how do we connect on an intellectual level, having deep conversations. Emotional intimacy, right, is also a big deal, a close connection when two people feel safe and heard and valued. Physical intimacies can be just touching, non-sexual touching, right? A massage, just rubbing someone's back, right? Where there's not any expectation of something to come. And then, of course, there is sexual intimacy, is something that is clearly part of thriving, flourishing relationships. And then there's energetic or experiential intimacy where we enjoy things together, right? Maybe it's going to the park, maybe it's going to an art class, whatever it may be. So all of these things combined help to contribute to a true intimacy in a relationship. And so as we begin to become more intimate and we're connected, we're able to have these honest conversations that hopefully, as we begin to get better at this, we can prevent misunderstandings. We can reduce emotional frustrations. Part of that is, though, that it requires active listening, right? Me being present right here, right now with this conversation that we're having. And that can be challenging, right? It could be that there could be some cognitive issues that are preventing me from being engaged fully right here in this moment. There can be speech challenges that the speech is soft, I'm not quite able to engage. So it's important to think about being intentional about the way that we communicate with other people, right? So that we're engaging in a way that's the most effective to build our relationship. So let's talk a little bit about how do we best communicate. These are some simple skills that, from a counseling perspective, I teach my students about these things all the time. Active listening. What is active listening, right? As men, right? I can tell you this is an experience I have. I can hear without listening, right? My wife can be talking to me and she'll get done and she'll ask, "Did you hear what I just said?" And I heard her, but I wasn't here, right? I wasn't all the way in. So active listening is paying full attention when I'm with someone else. It's more than just listening, it's eye contact, it's head nodding, it's facial expressions, right? Showing someone that I am actually engaged with what's going on. It's an essential component. Most of our communication is done non-verbally, right? 75%. And so it's only a little bit about what we say. So people are always watching how we respond. The other thing is learning to ask questions. Um, many people struggle with being able to ask questions, and particularly open-ended questions. Most of us are really good at saying something like, "Do you feel better today than you did yesterday?" That's yes or no answer, right? That's a closed-ended question. But that doesn't give us a lot of information. We're always going to get more and a better connection when we learn to ask open-ended questions. How, why, when, questions that begin like that always give you more information and allow you to connect on a deeper level. And then regular check-ins with one another. How are you doing? How was your morning today? And sometimes we can even talk about doing this at a specific time. I think we've got this on another slide. Maybe it's every morning when we have coffee, we do a check-in. How are you today? Let's talk about what the day is going to look like. Maybe it's every night before you go to bed, where we begin to talk about how was the day? What would you have liked to see gone differently? What was good about the day, right? Let's talk about the good stuff too, not just the things that we struggle with. So other things that I think that can help with connection and intimacy, simple things, holding hands, listening to music together, watching a TV show, watching a movie, right? Something where you're both engaged in the same activity can bring emotional connection. And then these small gestures, reaching out and holding someone's hand, touching them on their back, right? Shows that you care. Physical touch is such a powerful emotional motivator, right? Stuff happens in our bodies when we get touched physically. There's a physical reaction to that. Um, and so it's learning about how can I do some of these little things that can show my partner that I'm engaged, that I'm loved, that there is an intimate connection between the two of us. So a great question would be, what are some examples of simple acts that you can start sharing more often? And maybe for those of you who are listening, type it in the chat and give us some responses to these things. I'd be curious to hear as you've heard some of this, as I've shared, talking about what maybe an area that you could do better in a simple act. Get too much. Another screen here. Struggling with, let's see the chat. I see plan a dinner out and invite them on a date. Great suggestion, right? Being intentional and doing something with and for someone else is a great example. Listening to a podcast interview with a well-known person while driving. Sure, right? You're together, you're both engaged in something where you're spending time together. And we're going to talk about it on the next slide, but this falls into that arena of quality time with one another, right? Doing something that that when we're together that can increase the intimacy. Those are both great suggestions for that. Oh, went too far. So I alluded to this. Gary Chapman is a fairly well-known marriage counselor. And many years ago, he wrote a book called The Five Love Languages. And if you have not read it, I strongly encourage it. It's a wonderful book, learning about the ways that each of us experience love, that we want to be loved. And there are five areas, hence the title of the book, The Five Love Languages, right? Words of affirmation, acts of service, physical touch, quality time, and receiving gifts. And each of us has a primary love language that we like, that we want. The challenge becomes whatever that love language is for you, that's the way you love other people, right? Because there's an assumption that if my love language is quality time, other people want quality time. So I'm going to do that. One of the challenges with me is my wife does not care about acts of service, right? But those things matter to me. And so I might love her in a way where I do the dishes. And early in our marriage, I would say, honey, I did the dishes. And she's like, that's great. It doesn't do anything for me, right? I assumed that was a way to her heart. And so the challenge becomes learning what your partner's love language is. That requires some conversation, right? That requires talking about what it is that they like. I would strongly encourage, as a couple, read the book together and talk about it as you go and begin to learn what these things are. So, you know, I think they're fairly self-explanatory what they are. Words of affirmation is saying, I love you, I care about you, I value you, I respect you. Acts of service, doing the dishes, cleaning the house, mowing the lawn. Physical touch, right? Just again, holding hands, massaging with no expectation. Not necessarily that I'm touching so that I can have sex later on, right? Because that's sometimes an ulterior motive. Quality time. Quality time is very difficult in couples because two people might view that very differently. Sitting on the couch together, watching a football game may or may not be quality time in a relationship, right? So it's important to talk about what it is, what quality time means to you, and then gifts. Does someone really value receiving gifts? And so some things you can do to improve, to connect through the love language is spend quality time doing things that the other person enjoys, right? It's their love language. So we need to love them the way that they want to be loved. Write a letter to them, telling them that you love them, that you're grateful for what they've done. Maybe you buy them a small gift. Um, and maybe you just do something to make their day a little bit better. So again, I encourage you to think about these things, have a conversation with your loved one about which of these five is the most important to you, and then do your best to learn to love them that way. So also, we talked about what are some small things that we can do. So we think about these five love languages, and if quality time is someone's love language, what are some things that we can do to engage in to spend quality time together? Um, Oftentimes, these shared activities might change as Parkinson's disease progresses, right? Things that you used to do together may be things that are more challenging for you to do now. Requires a shift, right? A pivot. So, how can I still find these things that we both enjoy and do them together? Take some conversation, right? Having the talk about what is it that you enjoy doing? What would you like to do on a Saturday afternoon? And looking at, and maybe, one of the things that I found really amazing about Parkinson's disease is since I started really understanding the field and connecting with people who have Parkinson's disease, is how many people have become engaged in art and never did anything with art before they were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And they love art, right? So Parkinson's disease took away potentially some of the things that they enjoyed. But as a result of these changes, they've discovered a new passion that they never knew they had, and they absolutely love art. That's been an amazing discovery for me to watch people as they've gone through that and found these new ways in life to enjoy your time and enjoy time with one another. So, thinking about these unique bonds that we have, right? Every relationship is unique. Each of us has a different personality. Each of us has different expectations. Each of us has different things that we enjoy. And it's finding how do we still connect with that emotional bond, right? Because Parkinson's disease affects us in every way, right? We talked about that at the beginning, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And but it doesn't have to ruin the relationship, right? But it takes intentionality. It takes understanding that these changes are going to happen as the disease progresses. And I need to understand that emotionally, we can remain connected regardless of what happens physically, mentally, spiritually, right? But it's taking time to celebrate what makes our relationship unique, right? What are the things that we enjoy doing together? What are the things that my partner enjoys doing? And you know what? Maybe I'm going to learn to start enjoying those things too, right? I think frequently in my life, it's easy to become selfish and want to do the things that I want to do. And then when we don't do the things that I want to do, I get frustrated, but I've never spoken the things that I want to do, right? i.e., unspoken expectation. And then I'm frustrated with my wife, right? Maybe the solution is not even maybe, the solution is learning what she enjoys to do and figuring out how I can become involved in that and immersed in that so that we can do these things together. Also, a great thing to begin to think about is honoring these milestones that happen in our relationship, honoring the things maybe that we begin doing something that we never did before and we love it. Let's talk about that. Let's honor it and show the appreciation that I've learned something new and you and I have connected in a way that we never connected before, and that's amazing, right? Appreciate those things. Part of that becomes I need to learn, goes back to the mindfulness, right? Meditation, thinking about the experiences that I have and appreciating those and sharing those with my loved one. So often I think we spend our time going through life on autopilot. And sometimes we don't have these deep conversations talking about the things that we should be celebrating in life. How have I grown as a result of my Parkinson's disease? Right? Post traumatic growth is something that I frequently talk about, and it's a real thing. It's, someone gets diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and there's usually a setback, right? There's an emotional setback that's a result of that. And for many, resilience takes us from that setback back to where we used to be. Post traumatic growth is a fascinating construct where people actually are better than they were before they were diagnosed at some point, right? So I have a friend who was 6 years ago, he was in an accident. He was riding a motorcycle and got run off the road and lost a leg and lost his eyesight. And traumatic experience, right? I mean, I can't even imagine having to deal with that. But today he is the most joyful, kind-hearted, loving man. And he will tell anyone who talks to him, he says, I'm not thankful for what happened to me, but I am such a different person today because of what happened to me. And it's allowed me to grow and learn about me. And I think that story can be all of our stories, right? Do I let something that happens in my life define me? And do I let it define my relationship? Or do we take these challenges that we're faced with and learn new ways to connect and learn new ways to love one another? So, as we're kind of getting down to the end of this, um, being compassionate in our communication is important. Understanding that a relationship is made up of two imperfect people, right? Not having the expectation that my partner is supposed to know what I think, how I feel, what I want without any communication. right? So it's learning to have some not only self-compassion for me, but have compassion for my partner as well. Understanding that they may be the one with or without Parkinson's disease. Let's say they're the one who doesn't have Parkinson's disease. They still have their own struggles, right? Whatever they may be. Being a care partner for someone with Parkinson's disease has its own burdens, right? And it's challenging. And it's important that we acknowledge that struggle and that we allow those things to bring us together rather than to tear us apart. So many of the challenges that we face in life can be changed through compassion and grace, right? Understanding that we're imperfect people and knowing that mistakes are going to be made. And just because I don't behave in the way that you want me to, expect me to, doesn't mean I don't love you and doesn't mean that I don't want to remain as your partner and do this together. Yeah, and being learning and understanding that, we kind of talked about it a few slides ago, comes with this self-intimacy, right? Becoming more self-aware of maybe how my reactions affect my partner, right? Reaction and responding are two very different words, right? Learning maybe to become aware of the reactions that I have when my partner does something that I don't like, right? It could be a facial expression. It could be something verbal that I say. It could just be my, excuse me, my body language that says, you know what, that really bothered me. And I'm angry about that. Becoming self-aware of how my reactions affect other people makes such a difference. Because if I can't change a problem that I can't identify, right? So if I can identify that my reactions are causing relationship problems, then I can begin to think about how do I need to correct that? Maybe I'll need to learn to change my facial expressions when I'm having a conversation with a loved one, right? And recognizing and nurturing intimacy, right? Those areas of intimacy that we talked about, the spiritual intimacy, the experiential intimacy, the emotional intimacy, right? How can I, in my relationship, improve in each of those areas? Or which of those areas do I struggle with? Again, self-intimacy, right? I'm evaluating where I'm struggling, where I um, fall short, and identifying that, and then saying, how can I improve in that? Next step might even be, how about figuring out what that is through some introspection and sharing that with your loved one, right? All of a sudden, now you've got vulnerability. When we begin to share from the heart, and we trust another person with how we feel, the thoughts that we have, some of these deeper things that we try to hide from other people, right? Because we view them as weakness. Anytime that we can share vulnerably with someone else, relationship builds, trust builds, and we begin to have a deeper connection, right? Think about the people in your life. Maybe it's your or spouse, your care partner, your loved one, or a friend, right? Who's that person that really knows you? I mean, knows you, right? Knows you on the inside. Oftentimes, I believe my wife knows me better than I know me, right? And it's important that we allow other people in, right? That other slide that shows into me, you see, right? I have to be vulnerable to allow you to see into me. And that takes courage, takes trust, but it's so critically important. And being vulnerable can dramatically change the trajectory of a relationship. So some encouragement to think about applying some of these strategies in your daily life. How about just some simple positive reinforcement, positive words of affirmation, right? From the five love languages. Um, letting your partner know what you appreciate about them when they do something. I really appreciate that you did the dishes after dinner last night, right? How often do we not say anything when that happens, right? Again, that could be an unspoken expectation that I have of the other person. Then if it doesn't get done, I get angry. When it gets done, I just assume that that's what you were supposed to do. Something simple as saying, I appreciate this. Makes me feel special when you make my coffee for me, right? Sometimes doing something that's really unexpected for our loved one can make a world of difference. Like that last example, making the coffee, right? All of a sudden, your partner goes to make the coffee for the next day and it's already made. Seems so simple, right? It's an act of service, right? One of the 5 love languages. Goes back to make sure, spend some time finding out what your partner's love language is, and then begin to think about how can I do something that loves them that way, right? It it seems so easy and so intuitive, but so many of us don't take the time to do it because let's just face it, life's busy, right? And like me, I am I can be selfish, right? And I can think about me and what I need and my wants rather than focusing on the other person. Telling someone thank you for being there for me, right? Simple stuff. I really appreciate how you listen to me. That's an important one, right? When we're having some of these conversations, these intimate conversations, talking about expectations, desires, needs, wants, it's after you're able to voice some of these things, thank your partner for listening. Thank you for receiving that the way that you did. Thank you for being understanding with the way that I feel and my struggles and some of the things that I want. And, you know, I think one of the critical aspects as we wind this thing down is understanding that emotional closeness is not necessarily a destination, it's a journey, right? We are going to, over time, as we have changes, we're going to connect on emotional levels very differently. Um, sometimes it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? We're very connected emotionally. Something happens and that emotional connection can wane a little bit and we lose it because we become focused on an event, an occurrence in my life rather than focusing on us and what brings us together, right? Oftentimes it's the focus on the things that tear us apart, the problems, the burdens that we have in our life, rather than focusing on what's good. And, one of the greatest things that I think anybody can do that's super easy is to begin thinking about gratitude, becoming more grateful. I can tell you unequivocally, people always have more to be grateful for than they don't. Always. And I frequently share this story. Years ago when I was doing counseling, I had a guy come in and we were talking about this, and I asked him to make a gratitude list. And when he came back the next week, I just said, when you're done, bring it back to me. The next week, he shows up and he brings me this list, and it's maybe got 25 things on it. And I tore the list up and I threw it out. And I said, let's start over. I said, you have 2 eyes and you can see. You have 2 ears and you can hear. You have 5 fingers on each hand, 5 toes on each feet. You can walk, you can talk, right? All of these things that each one of us take for granted, and begin to understand how much we have to be grateful for. The other step of that is, how much do I have to be grateful for in my care partner, in the person whom I spend my days with, right? My emotional connection with my wife can change based on what I focus on. For example, right? Each one of us has the thing in our loved one that drives us crazy, whatever it is, right? You may have more than one, right? 1 or 2 or 3 or 10, whatever. But I can either focus on that thing, whatever it is that drives me crazy, or I can focus on the 900 that you do that I love, right? Again, simple mind shift, not Pollyanna. It's not life is great. It's I'm just choosing to look at the good rather than looking at the bad. So that's kind of gotten us to the end. I hope that something that we talked about resonated. Maybe it's the five love languages. Maybe it's learning about how I want to be loved. That's really where it starts. And then learning about your partner, how they want to be loved. Maybe it's learning about some of these simple things that we can do, spending time in mindfulness, meditation. Maybe it's journaling. It's learning about how I have grown throughout my life in this journey with Parkinson's disease. Maybe it's learning about some small things that I can do for my loved one to make them feel valued and loved. Maybe it's understanding the importance of vulnerability and trust, right? I think there were a variety of things in here that I need to remind myself of in my relationships. And so hopefully those of you who are on here found something that you can take away when you leave. And that is all I've got.
Thank you, Brad. It's essential that we continue to have these conversations as relationships evolve naturally, right? As we ourselves evolve, especially in the progression of Parkinson's disease. It's important to have that known fact that we will change. Our love language will change. The way that we engage with one another will change. And so I really appreciate the way that you've outlined how we can continue to foster this sense of connection with our loved ones, even beyond Parkinson's. So everyone who's in our circle, right? How do we continue to foster that sense of connection? And what I'm hearing, my big takeaway from this presentation was fostering that sense of connection with myself first.
Mm,
Being able to establish that with myself allows me to be able to communicate that clearly with those in my circle, whether that's a
absolutely.
spouse, a partner, children, whomever I might identify as a loved one in my life.
Yeah, that's such a critical component, Krista, is I need to know who I am.
Hmm.
I need to understand my emotional reactions. I need to understand how I receive love. And because if I don't know about me and who I am, I'm going to allow someone else to define me. And I'm going to continually be trying to fit myself into a mold to make you happy and be the person that I think you need me to be.
Mm,
That's not true vulnerability.
yeah.
That's not true trust and engagement, right? So learning who I am and being true to that, but it doesn't mean discounting other people's feelings along the way.
Thank you, Brad. Two questions that are related, and I'd love to ask the first one. Um, One of our viewers is asking, how can I help my husband with Parkinson's who struggles with apathy and doesn't communicate? Is there anything that can improve his engagement?
You know, great question. Apathy is one of those uh, features of Parkinson's disease. It's exceedingly challenging to deal with. Nobody knows what specifically to do. One of the things that I think is critically important, and we talked a little bit about it in this talk today, is asking open-ended questions. How can I help? What do you need? The other thing is, as we, I think it's common that the person with Parkinson's disease who may have apathy doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to engage. And I think it's important that we don't fall into a nagging uh, perspective. You should be, you ought to be, right? Rather, go into that with a let's. Why
Mm,
don't we take a walk? Why don't we go to an art class? Why don't we go to the support group, right? And go with them. I have this conversation with my dad on a regular basis about my mom. He's like, your mom's not going to the gym. And I'm like, Dad, are you going with her? And so, right, it's how can we another way to connect emotionally,
mm,
right? Is let's go. How can I help you do XYZ
mhm,
and offer? and understanding that it's not necessarily going to go the way you want it to go,
Hmm.
but being there to say, let's do this together. I love you and I want to be a part of your life and doing some things together. That sounds pretty simple. It's not easy, and apathy is such a challenge, but that's such a good question.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. I really admire the let's and we language. Why don't you go to the gym? Why don't you eat your salad? Why don't you drink your water? Let's have a glass of water together.
Absolutely.
Let's have a cup of tea and go sit outside. This language of it feels more collaborative versus directive, and I feel that that is really supportive in relationships. So thank you for bringing some awareness to that. In the same vein, Brad, we had another viewer they say, how do you engage in these discussions with someone who has always shied away from having emotional conversations or anything that's touchy feely? So how do I encourage these meaningful conversations with someone who has avoided this emotional or heartfelt um, discussion?
Yeah, another tough one, right? Because I think we probably all know someone whom we've encountered in our life who's that way. I think one of the things that is effective is, do I model that behavior?
Mm,
Do I share with you about how I'm feeling, about my struggles, and allow you to see that in me? And hopefully allow you to begin to understand the value of doing that. Again, I don't usually even like to say always. I'm against ever telling someone you need to share more emotionally with me. It's
mm,
it's not going to work well. But if I model that for you and show you what that looks like, maybe I share with my partner the way that me and a friend connect emotionally and the way that we share emotions and how much I value that my friend shared these feelings that were deep and she was vulnerable with me. Those things I believe can begin to influence someone to be more willing. Now, that being said, there are people who really struggle with an emotional connection, with feelings, and it's not uncommon that men struggle with it. You ask a man how they feel, and there are a few answers that they're going to give you. I'm mad, I'm hungry, I'm angry, right? Happy. But really digging into how you feel is difficult. And
mhm.
so I think just modeling that behavior and sharing your emotions could potentially be a beneficial thing to do.
Providing the example of the behavior of which you hope to provide for your loved one that might mirror that behavior back to you in
Definitely.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very valuable.
yeah. Thank you for that. I think this providing examples of conversations. Like I had this conversation with my friend, or even sitting at the table and saying, I need to share X, Y, and Z. Can we sit for a moment and you just listen to what I need to tell you? And that is a modeling behavior. You really showing how you hope to receive communication from your counterpart.
Absolutely. And I think that we forget of the importance of modeling, and it
Mm-hmm.
works in every area of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
From when we're kids, how do we learn things? We typically learn because we've seen someone else do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we watch that, we begin to understand that there are different ways that I can attack problems in my life, that I can communicate, that I can interact with other people. And what a great way, rather than telling, let me
Mm-hmm.
show,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Brad, what advice would you give to a couple who feels emotionally disconnected due to the impact of Parkinson's on communication and intimacy? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think probably the first thing that I think is essential, and again, I think this goes beyond just Parkinson's disease. It's being intentional about the relationship. It's making sure that we are spending time with each other, that we are not so concerned with everything else that's going on around the house. Maybe we turn the TV off and we sit down and we have a conversation about what your struggles are. Share with me, what are your struggles with Parkinson's disease? How are you feeling about things? What do you, how can I be a part of this process differently maybe than I am now?
Mm.
I think that if we don't prioritize our relationships, they don't happen.
Mhm.
We're just busy. Life shows up. And so I think being intentional, setting time aside to have heart-to-heart conversations with one another, and
Mhm.
again, modeling what that looks like, right? I think that's important.
You spoke to, let's sit down and have a conversation. And I recently gave a talk about active listening, which was one of
Mm,
the key tools that you highlighted in this
yeah.
presentation today. Active listening, listening with the intention to not respond. So allowing people that space to share without, I don't know, offering suggestions or advice, but really just holding that space of conversation with intentional awareness to just listen. Just listen. So powerful.
It is. And I think that we all know someone whom we've had a conversation with, right? If I ask you, who's somebody that's a great conversationalist that you know? Almost to a person, that's going to be someone who listens to what you
Mhm.
say, right?
Mhm.
Most of us are trained to listen to respond, as you just said.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you talk, but really I'm thinking about what I'm going to say as soon as you stop talking.
Mhm.
That's not the way that we build relationship. The way that we build relationship is listening and hearing what you're saying to me beyond just the words, right?
Mhm.
What's below the words? What's the emotional? What's the pain? What's the struggle that's there? And how can I engage with that?
Thank you, Brad. Any final words that you might like to share with our community today as we wrap up our Valentine's Day themed program?
Yeah, what an awesome program, Krista, that you put together today. And I'm always honored to get to come and share with this group. I think the final words and the encouragement that I would offer would be there's always room for more, right? Relationships can always be better. If you're in a position where you're not emotionally connected, you're not happy with the way things are going, change it, right? Engage in some of these things we just talked about. Spend time talking, evaluate who you are, what's going on in you, what are the emotions that you're struggling with, and share them with your partner. Ultimately, just learning to become vulnerable and trusting, I think, can change so many things. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brad. And a big thank you to all of you who tuned into our webinar today. Really appreciate you showing up in this frame of curiosity, wanting to learn more about what it means to feel close to our loved ones beyond Parkinson's. And if you have any questions in your journey through Parkinson's, please don't hesitate to reach out to our helpline at 1-800-4PD-INFO. You can also visit our website at parkinson.org. But before you go, the Parkinson's Foundation offers these programs through surveys that you offer. So please give us your feedback. It's essential in shaping the Foundation's programming. So as the webinar concludes, a survey will pop up on your screen. Just take a few moments to share your thoughts. Let us know what topics you'd like to see in future sessions. All right, my friends, may you be well. May you feel loved. May you be heard. And may you listen. Until soon.